Okay, so our goal for today is to be able to be given a standard form, right? Something like this. We'll get to in the back, and to rewrite it as a vertex form. That's what we want to do. So last night in your homework, you figured out, well, graphing this way is actually a lot easier than graphing, this vertex form is a lot easier than graphing in the standard form, which is on the back, which is anything that has A, B, and C, right? If it has an A, B, and C, that's standard form. So if we can rewrite any of these equations to look like this in vertex form, it's actually a lot faster to graph. I mean, otherwise, if I told you to graph this one, you just have to do a big old T-chart, and you have to try to factor that, and it would take a long time. But this way is actually a lot easier and faster. So, what we're going to do is take some baby steps about this. The first thing you'll notice is that they all have something squared, right? They have some binomial, two terms, right? X plus or X minus. And it's always X plus, X minus. It's never like 2X or 3X, okay? Now, if you remember what that actually means, it means X plus 4 times X plus 4. Two binomials multiplying by themselves that are the same thing. That's what X plus 4 squared means. So that's what all these had in common, right? This one had X plus 2 and X plus 2. So the trick is if you're given a polynomials that we want to try to turn it into where it has two terms that factor, and they're the same. Okay, so that's what we're going to practice first down here, is that if we want to multiply two binomials together, what would they be? Okay. And what would that make that number right here? Okay. So if you have a z squared plus 8z, what number would you put in here and here? And of course they have to be the same, right? That's the idea, so we can write it as a square term. What would you put here and here so that they would add up to 8? Right? Right? Plus 4 and plus 4, right? That adds up to 8. Now, if you multiplied this out, what would that make this number equal on the outside? 16. Right? So we can now write it, since it's z plus 4 times z plus 4, that's z plus 4 squared. And that's the first part of getting the x-coordinate of that vertex. So what we just did is figure out what number do we need to put here, and it's called that completes the square. And that's finding a number. So if you ever hear complete the square, you're looking for a number. The right number that if you put it here, it'll factor to the same binomial twice, and then that way you can start rewriting your equation, your graph, to look like this in vertex form. So we just figured out how to get this, how to get that part. We'll talk about that part on the back side. And we're not going to have any numbers in the front for today. That's what's going to be tomorrow. But it's going to be mostly the same steps, just like a GCF. Okay. So that's the first step. How do we get that x-coordinate? And remember, it is the opposite. So the vertex from here, just looking at this, is actually -4 and then comma something. Okay. So it's always the opposite. So another one. And you want to be thinking about a pattern that might be easier to get this. I'll ask you to write it down a little later. But yeah, we want to do two binomials that are the same. They have to be the same thing, right? It's going to start with x, Now, what would add up to 34? Has to be the same number. 17 and 17. Okay. Now, what would make that c value on the end? 289. 17 times 17, right? So now you can rewrite this as x plus 17 squared, and we know the vertex would be at like -17 and then comma whatever the y was, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Okay. So not too bad, right? That's just the first part. So see if you can try number 7, 8, 9, and 10, or at least 7 and 9, and check this on next to you, see if you got the hang of that. Okay. And then write a little direction at the bottom on what would you do step 1 and step 2, just to write it out in words. So some directions here as you saw. Step 1, what do you do? How do we go from 8 and get 4? How do we go from 34 and get 17? Half of B. So first step, you can take half of B. And B is take half of it. So if it's negative 14, you know it's going to be negative 7. Negative 7, that adds to negative 14. Okay. Second, you take number 1 and you raise that to the second power. So we could, number 1, negative 7. Negative 7 times negative 7 is 49. That's probably the most straightforward way you can write down those directions. First, take half of B, whatever it is. And if B is not there, you use 0 first. Okay. And then you can square it, and that'll give you the completed square, which is C. That's the C value. Technically, this would be the y-intercept if we graph it. So, not too bad. You will notice we are starting with just some basic, easier ones. So, you will notice that I gave you all even B values. Okay. But tomorrow, right, I'll change a little bit because what if I have like x squared plus 3x? Right. What's half of 3? Right. It's a decimal, right? It doesn't come out even. So it's nice when it's an even number, but you can have even or odd. But if it comes out to a decimal or a fraction, you just leave it as, okay, 3 over 2. That's half of 3 is 3 over 2. And then you would still multiply together, so 3 over 2 squared, right, would be 9 over 4. So the completed square number would be 9 over 4. So it's okay to have fractions here. You will have fractions half the time, because half the numbers are odd, half the numbers are even. But we're just starting with all even today, just so we can get the hang of it. But don't worry if you get fractions. You don't have to make it a decimal. It's actually a little bit more difficult if you do in the long run. So leave it as a fraction. Leave just 3 over 2. And it'll make your life easier later on. Okay, so halfway there, right? That's not too bad. Now you know how to take an equation, a basic equation that's in standard form, and get the first part, the vertex form. Just the squared part where we get the x-coordinate. Okay? So let's flip it over to the back and do the whole thing. I'm just going to rewrite it so I can stack this vertically so it makes sense. Alright, so let's do the same thing. What you're going to do now is kind of ignore this 18 for a second and do the same thing we just did. So go through here and say, well, what is this going to factor to? Right, so x, x. And then half of b is minus 4. Right, same thing. And what's negative 4 times negative 4? 16. So here's where we're going to end up getting the y-coordinate. So it's actually plus 16. Right? Now, in my original question, it's 18. So I need to actually make these equal. I need 16. What do I need to add to it to get 18? Plus 2. And that's how we're going to get our y-coordinate. It's just by balancing it out, making it equal. So the first 3, that's what we did in the front. It's x minus 4 squared. Right? That's what it factors to, x times 4, x times 4. And then we have the y-coordinate on the outside. It's the number that kind of balances it out and that we are stuck with from the very beginning, so we have to make sure it stays equal to 18. Even though our completed square number was 16, right, because 4 times 4 is 16, so I added 2 more to get that 18. So now you can see this is just like your homework. So the vertex, right, is at 4, 2, and you could graph it just like you did last night. Okay? And that's the That's the process for getting the x and the y coordinates of the vertex. Okay? Is trying to get them equal to whatever number, now that you have a number here. And you'll get better at this. You'll look at this and say, okay, that's half of -8 is -4. -4 squared is 16. Okay, that means I need to add 2 to get 18. And you'll start being able to do this, pretty quickly. But at first, we're going to run through it like this. Okay, let's look at number 12, because it just looks a little different. So if you're missing a number, what number should you use? What's the C value here? Yeah, 1 is A, 4 is B, and if there's no number here, you'd use 0. So as usual, if you're missing a number, use 0. So we have to have our numbers add to 0 right here. Okay, so I'll do the same thing. So we need 2 binomials, and they. Right. So we'll get half of B is 2 and 2. Right. So we're going to get x squared plus 4x. Right. 2 times 2 is 4. So what do I need to do after this to balance it out? Yeah, minus 4, right? So we get back to 0. So since I added 4, to get back to 0, subtract 4. And those factor to x plus 2 times x plus 2, right? X plus 2 squared. And we just bring down the 4. There you go. Your vertex is at -2, -4. Now what we're also going to do is combine things that we've learned before all together, right? So we can come up here and say, well, I know how to factor this because it's only 2 terms. You probably have seen now that when there's only 2 terms, that's easier to factor. So I know that's going to factor to x times x plus 4. And if I want to find the x-intercepts, I can just set that equal to 0. So I get x equals 0 and x equals -4. So I get my x-intercepts here and here, right? I know my vertex is -2, 4. So that's right here. So I can see it looks like this. Maybe do a t-chart to figure out, well, what are the values for -1 and -3, which will be the same. All right, so you can go in here and say, well, I know I have -2 and -4, and let's find out for -3 and -1 what those are, and just maybe plug one of them in. You can plug it in the original, or you can plug it in the factored version, doesn't matter. So if we do -1 squared plus 4 times -1, we'll get 1 minus 4, which is -3. All right, so -3 and -3. And now we can complete the graph. Oh, make sure you do actually draw the parabola. I see just some of the homeworks where you have the points there, but you don't have the graph. So make sure you do that last step and make the parabola as symmetric as you can. What will the discriminant be here? Positive, negative, or 0? Yeah. Positive. 2 solutions, 2 x-intercepts, right? So positive. Now keep in mind, we also have, what was the other way of finding the vertex? Right? We also had -b over 2a. So we could also use that. -b would be -4 over 2 times 1, which equals -2. And note how you get the same answer. -2 for the vertex and -2 for the vertex. And we can plug in -2 into the original equation, or the factored version, doesn't matter. -2 squared plus 4 times -2. Right? That's 4 minus 8. 4 minus 8 is -4. So you can see, we already learned how to find the vertex one way. and it should match your vertex form. So this is like a check. If you're not sure about how you just did the vertex form and like your x-intercepts and your vertex look weird, because sometimes you'll get your two x-intercepts and then you do your vertex and it's not in the exact middle, you're like, well, something has to be wrong, because if the vertex is not in the middle of your x-intercepts, something's wrong. This is another way you can do, your vertex and see if these match. You should get the same answers from negative b over 2a and in your vertex form. And this is what we're really going to start doing later this week and next week, is we're putting together everything we've done. So there's this little part that's new that we just did here, find, complete the square, get in vertex form. But we also have a t-chart that we did a lot last week. We know about the symmetry. We're using that. We did the discriminant, which we did on Friday. I showed you the other way of finding the vertex, the original way. We did in the middle of last week. And I also showed you finding x-intercepts, right, that we did 2 weeks ago. So we're really combining everything that we know together. And after a while, you want to get the idea of when to use which method. Because sometimes, you know what, if you just need the vertex and the equation's a little difficult, you might find that this is easier, negative b over 2a, and vertex form is too much work if you're just trying to find the vertex. If you're trying to find a lot of things, maybe that's a better way to go. So we'll look at that, and you want to get a sense of, well, when should I use which method? If factoring is easier, should I just use that? Or, maybe I should just go to my t-chart and plug in 0, plug in negative 4, and find out the x-intercepts from a t-chart. So lots of different ways of doing everything. And what you'll probably end up doing is getting used to a certain method and using another one to check. So if you have two ways of doing something, you can always pick one way of doing it, check using the other method. If they both match, you're good to go. Okay, now eventually, get you started on here, then you'll be good to go. You'll just go pretty much straight to the factored version. So eventually you'll look at this and say, okay, what's half of 6? Right? And you'll get positive 3. 3 squared is 9. And then you'll add the extra number to make it equal, which is 2. And then just rewrite that number below. So it's kind of a, right here, it kind of starts right here, and we go up here, figure out 9, figure out 2, and then drop it back down. It's like a clockwise rotation. You notice I don't have it written out, x plus 3, x plus 3. We don't really need that because of the same thing. We already know that that's what we're trying to do. Okay. Yeah. 2. 2 came from right here. I just dropped it down. And the reason it's 2 is because I need to make this part equal to this number. So since it was 9, I added 2 more to make it equal to 11. That's where the 2 came from. So, and this number could be a plus or a minus. This number, will that always be a positive? True or false? Will this number always be positive? So think about how we are getting that number. We're getting it from squaring. So if you square a number, is it always positive? Yes, right? Negative 3 squared is 9. Positive 3 squared is 9. So no matter what, this will be a positive number always. Okay? But this can be a plus or a minus. Right? So if this was like, 8, we'd do a minus 1 and make it equal to 8. So it just depends on the problem. But yeah, this is always going to be a positive. Okay. So one last one, go down to 15. Practice that. Okay. So I like rewriting it because it's easier if they're one on top of the other. And I'll leave a little space. And that's kind of the setup right here. Get ready to be the same binomial times itself, so it's squared. Right. So start off by taking that number, taking half of it. Right. Step 1, take half. then taking this number, putting it up here, squaring it, raised to the second power. That's step 2. And then step 3 is coming up with this number, so that it's equal to C. Right? So we need to do what? Minus 2. Right? And the last step is just drop down that number, same thing. Which will change a little bit tomorrow, maybe when we have some GCFs, but we'll wait for that tomorrow. But for now, that's the process. Start off with the B value, take half of it, goes inside the parentheses, square it, goes up here, just like the front. That's what we did on the front, right? And then on the back here, we just said, okay, now get it equal to that number. So we had to pick the right number here to make it equal to 2, so 4 minus 2. And then just drop that same number down. That's the y-coordinate vertex. And please actually stipulate the vertex. So write it out, vertex, colon, and again, it's the opposite sign of inside. So it's negative 2. This one stays the same, negative 2. So that's at negative 2, negative 2. Also note that the scale is different on different problems. So like this one counts by 0.5s, right? So when you're going to negative 2, negative 2, don't just count 2 squares left and 2 squares down. It won't be on the right number. Yeah. 4 minus 2 is positive 2. 4. Is that right? I think so, right? Okay. Did you find it? Okay, yeah. Yeah, as you can see, the mistake here, if we have any, it's going to be some sort of organizational thing. What's the arithmetic we're doing? Well, you know how to take half a number since elementary school. You know how to multiply 2 times 2, 3 times 3, 4 times 4 since elementary school. So the arithmetic is very simple and basic. That doesn't mean there's no room for error. So just keep in mind all the steps. Don't skip anything. Don't rush through it, and you'll be fine. It's usually when you think it's too easy, oh, I'm just taking half of this and squaring it, and you try to not write as much work, that's usually where the issues come up. So be patient, write it out anyway. And then from here, feel free to, do any method you want. You want to do a T-chart, then like you might have done on your homework, and then pick some numbers around it. If you want to try to factor it, you can try that. Write down the discriminant as a positive, negative, 0. You can do a lot of things that will help you. Okay? You could figure out the discriminant right here, find out b squared minus 4ac, and you'll know how many answers there are before you even start. 16 minus 8, there are going to be 2 answers for sure, because it's a positive number. So you already know there's 2 x-intercepts somewhere. And I'll let you know, kind of guide your graphing. Okay, so you can work on that for the next 10 minutes of class, and have it all finished when you walk in the door tomorrow.